this video, we're going to explore painting dark flesh colors, essentially an African skin tone. The miniature that we're using is from Reaper. It's a jade dancing girl. I've got some of the colors out on the palette that we're going to use. This brown liner is from Reaper. Very interesting color, and that it's very intense, very deep, dark brown. It's not as thick as your other standard paints, but definitely not as thin and watery as an ink or a wash or glaze. So this is a very interesting color that we're going to mix with a few of our others here. We've got some Vallejo colors. We have a leather brown. We have this Carn tan. This is a brown rose. We've got a Reaper kind of high density pigment here. This is Maiden Flesh. Back to Vallejo with some ice yellow. Back to the Reaper deep pigments, deep twilight. A couple more Vallejos here. This is green sky, and that's important for some of the highlights on the hair, but also we will lighten some of the skin colors with that. Essentially these are two of your primary agents of lightening these colors. So here we're going to focus more on warm colors, the face down through here, but on the backs of the hands, the backs of the feet, here, on the back of the shoulders, that's going to have more of this to lighten your colors. And I'm going to do a little swatch, kind of show you a few little color gradations. Since this is a more unusual flesh tone, it's not something you do a lot of. It's not like, say, light flesh tone or even undead flesh tone. So we'll do that little swatch to kind of show you how some of these colors mix together. We won't be using a whole lot of this, but this is Vallejo Transparent Red. We're going to use this in some areas, say on the cheeks or the insides of the hands, on the pads of the feet here. Tiny little touch of it, but it does some nice interesting touches. Some other things you'll probably see me use also. These are some mediums here. This is made by Vallejo, glaze medium. I like this because it keeps your paint a little wetter for longer, not just on the palette, but also on the miniature, and that lets you maybe do some wet blending here and there. This flow improver is essentially a substitute for water. It lets you thin down your paints, but not necessarily get the watermarks. It's a nice way to thin down paints, but avoid kind of the crazy things that happen when you mix in water. So we've covered the miniatures and the paint. Next thing we'll cover is the brushes and the palette. I have the brushes arranged on the palette in three primary groups. First one we're going to discuss are the filbert brushes. These come in a size range between usually 2 and 8. I like to use 4s and 6s. So there's a couple of 4s. This is a 6. They are kind of an all-purpose brush because you have this large flat surface but tapered edged. And what that's going to let you do is use this to do some blending. You'll see me use these when I do the color swatches. One last aspect of the brush is the chisel edge. So you have the large flat surface, tapered, and chisel. So you do a whole lot for one brush, and it lets you, again, lets you do some wet blending and a lot of other fun effects. The least expensive version of this is usually the American Painter. Get these online, most craft stores. Really not a bad price for what you get. And in terms of economy, can't get much better than these number 8 rounds, which are actually craft brushes. Got the original case right here. These come in a set of 10. See that the points on these are really not too bad when they're new. last for quite a long time, especially when you consider, for that price, 50 cents a brush. Again, lots of craft stores have these. And you can see here a newer brush with a nice tip. But when they start to get a little more abused, beat up, battered, well, you don't have to throw them away because they're perfect for painting bases. So you have something that's really rough surface. Why destroy all your good brushes when you can just take a brush that's already seen better days and jam the paint in there? Last group we'll discuss are these liner brushes. Again, you see American Painter, probably the most economical of all the liner brushes. Like the liner brushes because they hold a lot of liquid, a lot of pigment, and you can see you can go a long way with these. The spotters, I have some, I use those, but you tend to have to be very choppy with your paint strokes because you're always running out of paint. The whole purpose of the liner brush is that you've got all of this has paint in it instead of a spotter. It only has about that much to work with. This is kind of a mid-range liner brush here. It is actually from Winsor Newton. This is about halfway in between, say, the American Painter, and this is kind of your real deal here, the Winsor Newton Series 7 Kolinsky Sable. See by the handle, it's gotten a lot of use. I use this a whole lot, but it's not getting destroyed because a lot of the dirty work is being done by these other brushes. Other brushes that cost much less than your Series 7 Sable and serve a lot of other functions. So the brushes are discussed. One more thing we want to talk about is this palette. This is a fantastic surface. It's very non-absorbent, so perfect for keeping your colors alive a little longer. Here's an example of a full pad. So this is 9 by 12, 40 sheets. We got these off of Amazon. Find a lot of these in art stores. And the best part about these palettes, when it comes time for your cleanup, you're done for the day, you're done for the project, you just take off a sheet, rip it off, throw it in the garbage, and that's it. There's no trays to wash, nothing to clean, just throw it away. So we've got brushes, miniatures, paints, palettes. Now I'm going to do some of those color swatches to give you an idea of how we're going to let these colors interact with each other. Before we get started on the miniature, I just wanted to show you some mixes of the colors that are out here on the palette and how we're going to use these in relation to our cool lighter colors and our warmer lights. I'm going to start with the warmer lights. The colors out on the palette, we have some of the leather brown. I'm going to use the deep twilight, which makes it a little bit darker, but yet keeps it still on the warm side, meaning a little more reddish. You can mix blue with brown. It makes a nice dark, almost black, but that's more of a cold, dead color. We want some live flesh tone here. And I'm going to start and go dark to light. Here's our dark color. Now this is dark, a dark skin tone, so we're not going to get very bright with our lightest lights. So you can see I mixed a little bit of that Karen tan and start to blend it over this way. Mix a little more. And notice I didn't clean the brush doing this because I want some of my original mix. Still want some of my original mix there. So you can see we're approaching the middle. Some more of the tan, but now a tiny bit of that brown rose Get this a little bit lighter. And we're going to continue on towards the lighter lights. A little more of the brown rose. And you can see I like to have these little mini palettes within a palette. What that lets me do is lets me see where I've been, lets me see what I've got, and as I add a little more, I can refer back to what I've already put down. It's almost like a little color guide right there on the palette. You can see we've worked this just about as light as you're going to want to get. Now you can, and we will do this in a few places. This is the maiden flesh here. So we are going to, in a few select places, go a bit lighter. You see that the maiden flesh, compared to what we put out, it's almost a little bit on the yellowish side. You can see what qualifies as a light almost looks dark compared to the white of this board. So what we've just done are the lights you're going to see mostly here. Pads of the feet as well. We want to do another little color swatch here now, focusing in maybe on some of the green. So start out the same with the deep twilight and the leather brown mixed together. Start out with our dark. Now the mixture is going to focus a little more now on the leather brown. See, less of the Karn tan, more leather brown. I will put just a tiny touch of this in there. And now some of that green will work its way into this flesh mix, and it's going to give us a little different sense. See, a little more, a little bit cooler, because we were adding this green. You can see I just continue to add a little bit more of the green. A little bit more. But before, we don't want this to be in like an orc flesh. So I am, before it gets too much towards the green, I'm going to mix just a little bit of some of our lighter reds. I'm going to go right from the green into there, so it's almost more of a gray. And that is what we use. Here you can almost see the brush next to that color looks awful similar. Now that'd be easier because this is sort of a complex color theory right here for flesh tones. Not something that people are used to. And unlike, I don't know, say an orc or a goblin, whatever, you can mix whatever greens you want. It's just going to look like an orc here. You don't want this to look like an orc. We want it to look still at least vaguely human. So this is kind of the two primary things that we're after color-wise on the flesh. Warmer and cooler. So this way you know, as I talk about this, you know what the heck I'm talking about. You also know middle and the dark. While over here, I'm actually going to take one of these brushes, and this is where you'll see just how intense the brown liner is. So if we need really really darks here. That's what we'll put here to get those deepest shadows. When we compare it to, again, this is starting to look dark next to the white, but when you compare it next to what's going to be our darkest color, it starts to look a whole lot lighter. So I think armed with this little color chart here, these little swatches of color, I think now you're ready to start to put some paint to the miniature. We're going to start off with what I call the shaded base coat. So using these two ranges of colors of the flesh tone, the warm range and the cool range, we're set to do some base coats on the miniature itself. Going to use the filbert brush to start, and we'll go back to that initial mix of deep twilight and the leather brown. I'm going to use a little bit more of the deep twilight and block in the hair, because we know that's going to be probably the darkest darks on the entire figure. And you can see that I'm not really worried about any sort of overlap here. It might get onto the flesh tone. That's okay. That's one of the ideas behind the shaded base coat, is that in these early layers you're not really trying to paint inside the lines. You're just trying to get the primer covered. And in this case I used a brush-on primer. I actually mixed Vallejo white and gray brush-on primers together, or white and black, to make gray. I like to use, as often as possible, a neutral gray primer, because like we talked about before, this stark white, it makes your dark colors look really dark, makes your midtones look too dark, and it just makes your lights look dead, so there's no contrast. And that's why I like to have this neutral gray, because these, against this, they're about the same value, about just the same darkness value as this gray. So they just don't look quite as stark versus the same the way they do on the palette here. They don't look quite as stark. You don't start to think, oh my gosh, my lights are too light, my darks are too dark already. So you can see I'm just focused on covering as many surfaces as I can, because it'll be easier for me to contrast and compare what I've got once that primer is all gone. I work with a bigger brush like this, and the filbert holding it on the end, to reinforce that idea of working rapidly. Because if I work more rapidly, the paint's going to stay wetter, and that might allow me to do some of that wet into wet blending that I talked about. And that's a fairly simple idea. It's the paint's wet on the miniature, you got wet paint on the brush, and you essentially allow it to mix, just like how we're mixing here on the palette. We can do that here on the miniature. One way to help ensure that you can do that is to throw out some of the glaze medium, because that will keep this paint wetter, keep this paint from drying. Same thing on the palette too, but even more importantly on the figure itself. And here, the figure here is smaller and not terribly complicated, so it's not going to be as much of an issue. So still using the bigger brush, I'm going to start adding some lighter colors here. It may not even be noticeable at first. At this point, it's the same color going everywhere, even the places where we know that cooler color is going to go. So there we go. Again, brush being held this way, because I don't want to get into this just yet. That's a little bit too much for detail. This, see how I'm just dragging the brush over the surface. It's not a dry brush. Dry brush is very little pigment, just kind of a knit like that. What we're doing is we have pigment on the brush, and this is what we're doing. Every so often I might grab just a little bit of water to make sure the paint continues to flow. Now, what I'm going to do is start to reach into that Karn tan. And just like we did on the swatches here, see, I'm starting to kind of set up my colors how they're going to go. This progression, I almost kind of call this making the future color. This way I know, let's say I even do this. And start to put some of the brown rose. So I already know what's going to happen. I haven't even done any of that here yet. But before any of that, I've already got kind of my dark to light set out here on the palette. Now that's kind of an ideal situation too, to throw the glaze medium on top of this to keep that from drying. But again, this is it's a relatively small figure, so that whole shouldn't have to worry too much about the paint drying prematurely. But since this is our warm mixture, I'm going to stay here on some of these parts we know going to be warm. So the face, top part of the chest, down towards the stomach, top parts of the you got the thigh, the knee, and taking the brush, dragging it down a little bit on the fronts of the arms. Not doing the hair, so it's going to be a different set of colors there. I need to get the pad here, the bottom of this foot. Stop there. So what we're focused on now, as I said before, focused on those warm colors. So this gets progressively lighter, a little bit warmer, and just as before, it's pulling the brush along the surface, just dragging it like this. We will, not too long from now, switch over to a number 8 round. But for right now, again, I don't want to get myself too bogged down in detail stuff just yet. So plenty of paint on the brush, and start to, now I think at this point you can see the colors are getting lighter. What I'm trying to do is use, see this round tapered edge, I'm trying to use that to be able to do a little bit of blending. So the face, just pulling down. This light's also coming from this way. Just pulling that down. Top part of the chest, don't even worry about the little gold coin stuff that's going on here. That's something we're gonna worry about later. But right now, it's all about establishing some of these lighter colors. Now, if you feel the need, you can start to get into maybe a smaller brush if you want more control over that. So this now has more of your brown rose. I want to make sure the paint's not too wet. I want to have control over it. So now I'm gonna, you can see these colors are getting lighter. I'm gonna pick out areas on the face, on the nose, cheekbones here. Moving this down towards the knee. Don't want to forget about bottoms of the feet there. Do a little bit on the hands. I won't progress too light with this. So to keep this all from getting too rosy, start to throw a little bit of the maiden flesh, which graze that down just a little bit. What I'm going to do is, after we've thrown these colors out onto the miniature, I'm going to do kind of a little example of the face on a piece of matte board like we did those color swatches. And that'll give you a little better view. Because here, this thing is so tiny, it's going to be difficult for you to necessarily see all of some of the subtle things that we're doing with the colors. Making sure that I don't get too bright too fast. Leave that well enough alone. Just a tiny bit more of that maiden flesh. It's really not about highlights at this point, because we'll eventually go a little bit lighter in some of these areas. I'm going to leave this for right now, and I want to get to some of these cooler colors in the back, and that means taking out the green, go back into that original mixture of the leather brown, so we'll start from this point, and now start to block in some lighter colors here on this side, the back of the hand. So this is an entirely different color temperature that we're working with. Just trying to catch some of these areas of light. And it's not going to be too much. We'll gradually increase the light and the amount of green in there. And both things sort of happen at once. I think here you can see there is a little bit of kind of wet into wet blending because the paint it's still wet on the miniature. And I'm putting more wet paint on with the brush, moving that paint around. Now again, some glaze medium would really promote that. But I don't want it to stay too wet here. I want a little more control. So this white's still staying away from the hair. It's going to get some slightly different colors. And the top of the foot here, I want to make sure these get some bright colors. This, in a way, is going to reflect some of the stone floor. Take this a little bit further. But to keep it from getting too greenish, and still going into my warm color. It's the advantage of having this all spread out on the palette. So I was just making two separate mixes. I wouldn't have the opportunity to kind of go back in to what I already had. Again, it's all about just picking out what you think should be the lightest. Where is that light hitting it the most? So as I spin this around, and see where we're starting to kind of get warm here or cool on the other side. Well, we have to make sure that we integrate these two together. So that's why in some areas I actually let the cooler color work its way around towards the front, because we don't want this to be a split tone. And I'll go back into this one more time. That's about the extent of the green that I'll put in there. But it served its purpose. It kept this area from getting too rosy like what we had on the other side. That's on the calf there, on the back of the foot, a little bit on the ankle. Down the front of the arm. And this to me, I know some people wouldn't think of it in these terms, but to me this is a base coat. This is just the start here. All we're doing is planning things out, because we have more. See, the range is a little bit further. On the finished figure we have more darks established. We also have some of the golds and kind of your final highlights on the flesh tone. So I'll put in sort of the last, just about as light as I want to go. Next thing I want to do is do something with that hair. And what I actually want to do is take some of the green, some of that purple, and I'm going to, like I did here, catch some lights, like so. And we're going to glaze over the top of this. So that'll give us our really nice deep darks in the hair, but for now, it's just to throw a little bit of light on the hair. Some of these little bit of greenish accents here, it's just to add a little bit of interest. Because if everything was all the same type of brown, it would get really, really boring to look at really fast. So that's about the extent of it there, maybe a tiny bit more mixed with a little bit of the maiden flesh. And that's enough. So we have to, at this point too, decide what's going to happen with a lot of the straps. And I'm going to take that same color and paint a few of these. So that I don't forget them. Now, as far as some of this other stuff goes, the little bikini type stuff and all the other golds, a couple different ways you can approach it. We can just use the pale flesh, paint that over, and use glazes. So that's actually, I'm going to try that approach here and show you that. Before we get into that, I want to do that little color sketch of the face and show you some of the flesh tones on a bigger scale. I just want to do a quick little sketch here. Kind of illustrate some of what we did with the colors on the face here. It'll be maybe a little bit easier of a reference guide for you. I'm going to take some of the colors that we've got. The leather brown. I'm just going to do kind of a half of the face here. So what we started out with was, this was our base coat here. So let's just throw this out here. It's about what we started with. And what we've then done after that was to start to bring out some of the lighter colors. You can start to see a little bit of the cheekbone as I put some of the car and tan. With each layer, you'll see this kind of build up a little bit more. So we need the upper lip, your eye, up above the eye. You can already see, I see this start to pull out, almost like you're carving it out of, just carving it out of the paper. Again, thinking about, got the chin here, upper part of the cheek. Tiny bit of that green sky. And this is where you start to do things like the nose. And focus on that, the upper lip. Chin. Cheekbone. See, we're starting to get to about where we are now. Again, using all the same colors that were out on the palette. Now we haven't put this on the figure yet, but let's we're gonna have to put in the eye here. And we'll get into kind of a more detailed process of painting the eye when it's that time. So with the eye kind of marked out in place, I'm going to put some lighter colors on the cheekbone here. Nose. Building up to what is here on that face, and using all the same colors. Going up the nose, up over the eyebrow there. Just a little bit, so you have to make sure, even on your miniature, it's hard sometimes to get this shape in here. It's difficult. Also, it depends on the sculpt. But you can see on the figure here, you're able to get some in there. I'm doing is building up these lights because this is where I'll be bringing out the Reaper Brown liner. Might go one little step further with cheekbone here. Some of these areas that'll catch the most light. And I'll stop at this point right here, because what I want to do is get into the brown liner. Throw some of this over here. And this is what we're going to use to indicate more shape in the eyes, and the lips, and several other places. So here we go. Might even let a little bit of the purple mix in. What I'm going to do is establish top part of the eyelid. Work on lips, some shadow under the nose. An eyebrow. You have to get the lower lid as well. You need some shadow in here. I'm going to do most of this with the glazing. Same thing under the lips there. What we'll do when it comes time to do the eye, what I'm going to do is show you with a much smaller brush kind of where we're at with the eye right now. So I've got the liner brush. And we'll do see, I just put the two bright spots into the eyes. It's essentially what we've got here. Right now we basically just added in the whites of the eye. What we'll be doing with the miniature is actually holding it upside down. So we want to make sure this eye, your pupil here, is attached to that upper lid. Because if it's not, it looks very demonic. You want to make sure that pupil, so turn this back over, it's going to look much more normal being attached to that upper lid. A little bit more serene. Now typically you're going to want to keep the eye pretty dark as far as the pupil goes. You really don't want nice light blue eyes. That's just not going to be the case. You may want a little bit of color though. Now it's probably going to be too small to execute something like this. You know, actually showing the pupil in the iris like this. It's going to be too small of a scale. That's okay. That's no big deal. You might still be able to do that on your miniature though. You might still have a little bit of wiggle room to do that. Not always. One of the reasons I'm doing this much larger sketch like this is to just give you an idea of what's possible. So what I want to do is this to be a little lighter. So to catch, there we go. I have to catch just a little bit more. A little more light. But now the rest of this, possibly a few more lights. on the cheekbone. And just do a bit of, there we go. Because this will show you just how much, see that this was looking so dark, but now we put a genuine, really true, deep dark next to it. All of a sudden, it looked so incredibly dark. It's not quite as dark anymore. So hopefully, this little guide that we've made here will be helpful in the future for you. So the next segment, I'm going to go back to the miniature, and do some of the extras, the costume, put a few more lights on the face, and then do some darker glazing after that. So now I'm going to throw out a few of the additional colors, like the parts of the outfit here. I'm going to be doing most of the gold shading with the glazing. I'll show you that. So it's really starting off here. See it's a little bit of that ice yellow. Put a little bit of the leather brown in there to keep it from getting just too white to start with. One of the reasons I wanted to have some bright gold here on this this part of the outfit was, well, it sets the flesh tone, makes that much darker. So some of the jewelry here, the bracelets. Just indicating where those are going to be. All these guys over here. Things that are in her hands. Same thing over here. Not going to get very involved. It's just about letting me know where all this stuff is. And then pull out a few with some just almost pure ice yellow. Again, you don't have to worry that this doesn't necessarily look gold right now, because that's we're going to do some of that with the glazes. And what this should do is set that flesh tone color back really nice. So now that we've done that, that just about completes your shaded base coat. You can, at this point, if you want to push your lights a little bit more, on the flesh tone. I'm going to take a little bit of that. So I mixed in some of that ice yellow. And I can indicate a little bit, some slightly brighter colors on the face. Over the upper lip there, a little bit on the chin, top of the chest. A little bit here down at the bottom of the torso. Let's see, there's a little bit of a, see how we got some of the greenish color here? I want to preserve that. I don't want to lose that. A little bit down at the bottom of the feet. Same thing here, because those tend to be lighter. Make sure that there we go, a little bit on the inside of the hands. And I may even, just for the heck of it, go one little step higher. Just a few things right here. So you can see what we're slowly building up to here. The fingers, I want a little more light there, and don't be afraid. This is what I just did. I'll spin this around, you can see it. Brushed down some light, took away the excess if it was looking too light. So brush some on, take some away. So add some, subtract some. Now there are some greens on this figure. When it gets to be maybe the more detailed stages, I'll throw out some of these greens as an accent. I just didn't want it to get too confusing. In the opening stage, you throw out this kind of a turquoise green. Say, well, where does that fit in? So we're just about done with the shaded base coat stage, which means we can then move on to doing some glazing. I have a few glaze colors out here on the palette. Now I referred to them as glazes. We'll discuss that. Essentially, that's a very controlled wash using something really small, like a liner brush, instead of large brush with a huge swath of paint and just kind of slathering it all over the whole figure. That's not what glazing is about. Just got a few of them out here. I have a few from Vallejo. I have a sepia shade and a black shade. Got this from Secret Weapon. The baby poop, that's actually gonna be mostly for the golds here, mixed in with the sepia. And then I've got a couple of GW washes here. We got Agrax Earth Shade and Reikland Flesh Shade. So you're going to use a few different combinations of these. Not super heavy, not a whole bunch. It's not going to take much. We've got some decent darks already. This just lets us do a little bit of darker shading, maybe a little bit of tinting. So I'll throw these out on the palette and get to it. With those glaze colors out on the palette, we're ready to kind of move on to the next stage. There's not going to be as much of the glazing and tinting and shading as there might be on other figures, but there's still some. What I've done is taken some of the black shade. I've got it actually watered down in places. I start this off with a hair, because this will show you what it means to be doing a much more controlled much more control glaze. You see we even stopped right here because I didn't want to lose that highlight. What I do is set this up so that gravity works for me here. And I just leave that be. So what that does is that it creates a nice bunch of contrast here between the top part of that arm that's lighter. All of a sudden that looks so much lighter just by virtue of what we put behind it. So here I'm going to take some of the more watered down black and leave it at that. So that we preserved the lights instead of wiping them out, because that's what can happen a lot of times when people they put their washes over things. They just they annihilate all of the lighter colors that they had. So same principle here. I work around this side. It's all about making this arm look lighter. Don't want to kill the lights here, but what I do want to do is make this turn. So I know in here that's going to be really dark in there. But again, back to the more watered down as I work on this and let that go. So same thing that we did on the inside part of the hair. So right here again, to make the arm look lighter next to the hair. I might even let a little of the brown mix in. Again, turn this upside down. I don't know if you can really see it, but I have to turn it this way to make that gravity work for me. So turning it again and leave it go. So that's some of the principles of doing that glaze. You can see we used a small liner brush. It was very controlled, very targeted. Very precise. And what I'm going to do now, before I get too much more into flesh things, so this is where I'm going to take some of these colors. This is what's going to help create some of the gold. Now the baby poop is kind of a very intense wash. Let's make this so you can see it. See how that kind of goes down into the recess and starts to tint. See how it tints what was kind of a sort of dead gray light. All of a sudden now it looks gold because of this transparent tinting that we're doing. I'm going to go back over this with some highlights to make it a little brighter. But this is essentially what glazing is all about. This is very targeted application, and really just we know exactly where we want that to go. Keeping it very under control. I'm probably not going to use all that much of the glazes that I put out on the palette, and sometimes that's how it goes. Going back and forth between this Secret Weapon baby poop wash to the sepia shade. And you can do as many layers of these glazes as you want. You could do 6, 7 8 layers if you want to darken things down. It doesn't take as much time to do transparent layers as it does the opaque layers. You can almost get 3 transparent layers down for every 1 opaque layer. So just like with the hair, at a certain point I have to kind of let this dry. Which leads me to some of the final things we're going to do with our glazing here. Again, not as much as what you normally might see me do on a miniature. But I want some of the face to get some dark, so what I just did here, right down the side of the cheek, didn't do much on the front part of the face. I'm going to do a little bit around the eyes, a little bit under the nose, and pull some away. As I dabbed the brush on my paper towel and just took some away. So we've got kind of a watered down color here. Some of the brown, some of the black. Just working down in the shadows. So I'm going to turn this upside down to let gravity do some work. Do a little bit of shading there. Take the brown. Get a little bit here. Down by the ankle here, it needs a little shape. And don't be afraid to take your finger and wipe away if you think there's too much. So here, create a little more with some of the shadows there, where some of these straps are. Okay. So that's about as much as we're going to do with the glazing. I'll maybe throw a little bit here on the lips, take some away where I think I need to. And really that's about the extent of it. A little bit of brown here. Take away the excess. And that's going to do it for the glazing stage. What we'll do next is focus in on the face. We'll do the eyes. Might even, as this is still wet on the palette, take some of the ice yellow and just put a few highlights on some parts of the outfit. What I'm going to do in this next little segment here is work out some more definition in some of the dark areas. I'm going to work a little bit on the hair, bring out some more lights, and again, just create some more definition along So where the strap area is, in the eyes. I'm going to keep these glazes out on the palette that we've got, but I want to bring back some of the brown liner. As we mentioned, it's our darkest color. Now when I was doing the glazing, so I didn't really use the Reichland Earth shade or Flesh shade. Sometimes I kept that so that I could do this, so that I could mix my brown liner with that, so that I could also get a dark that's a little more red to use in some spots. Like about here. This little spot here. Right here on this side of the face, leading into the hair. Right here on the this little arm bracelet thing. I don't want this to really be about non-metallic metal, so I'm just going to keep it simple. You could have just used, instead of how I used the ice yellow, well, that could have been, I don't know, mithril silver, some kind of really bright silver, and you throw those glazing colors over that, and you would have gotten kind of the same effect. Okay. So again, that's why sometimes I might have a color out on the palette and not use very much of it. I also have it out, so I'm mixing this together, watering down brown liner and the Reichland Flesh shade. So I got the hands up here. Well, those need a little color, a little definition, and that's going to help that along a little bit right there. I'm going to grab one of the Winsor Newton brushes here, and I need to put some light on those fingers. That's obviously going to be way too pink until we mix. Yeah, I just took some of the Flesh shade brown liner and actually mixed regular paint in with that. What that does is create something that's nice and grayed down, but also something that's kind of watery. And you see I just did that on the arm. Another one over here on that side. Here. This part of the leg. So what that does, it's almost like a light wash. Washing is not always dark on light. Sometimes it can be light and dark. And the reason I did some of these here, that highlight was created kind of a hard, just a line going down, almost like we were highlighting a metal plate or something. And what I just did there, we was able to kind of tone down some of the harshness of that line. Doing some of that on the face. Again, with an unusual flesh tone like this, sometimes it requires a slightly different approach. I can go the opposite way here. So I'm taking some of that lightest flesh color and I actually mix it in now with some of the black. And now I'm doing some lighter colors here. I don't want it to, again, I don't want it to be too greenish. But you can see how different that is. It still has a little bit of a greenish feel to it, but not too much, and it's not too light. And because it's transparent, we can do some nice subtle things with it. I can even take that a little bit further here, and a little more of the light to it. This I didn't used to do this whole notion of mixing regular paint in with the glazes. I didn't used to do that at all. They were always very separate things, always kept separate. And I realized that that didn't really make much sense, especially being a watercolor painter. So I'm starting to go back and starting to pick up some of these lighter colors. Up here I want to, sometimes with this sort of flesh tone, you will get sometimes glossier highlight. The skin can be very glossy. Since it's darker, it shows that glossiness. Maybe a person whose skin is lighter could have the same texture of glossiness, but because it's so light, you don't see the same effect. So what I need to do is put in some eyes here. Try and hold this so you can see it. So there's the first one there. And now the other eye here. That. While I've got some of the ice yellow, I'm going to throw that out here onto the edges of the bikini thing here. Mix some of the baby poop in with it. There's a few areas down here that need a few light spots. Like so. Back to more of the lighter yellow. And catch a few highlights along the arm there. Got some of my brown liner. Gonna use back towards the eyes here. I want to get that top, that upper lid, and also the lower lid with a little more definition. Gonna put even more darks into the hair. Bouncing back and forth between the black wash and the brown liner. Brown liner to get some definition here on these straps. Like this. And on a few other areas that just need right here. Just need some more definition. Now I'm going to do one more application of light colors in the eye. So what I want to set up is the iris. And what I'm going to do is take some of that brown liner mixed with the flesh shade. Turn this upside down, like I had mentioned. And try and get those pupils, the iris is just in the right spot. That's kind of a hard thing to see, I know. And if you feel you need to make those show up a little bit more, I just added a tiny bit more light. And I mentioned I want to make sure there's enough of this light underneath where the iris is. Like I want to bring the cheek color back out just a little bit. I want the upper part of the chest here to get a few more lights. Working in some more light here. Right here, down by where the knee is. And the next little thing I'm gonna do is gonna bring out that transparent red. I'll do a little bit on the fingers and on the toes also. So to do some of these final touches of color, few colors were added to the palette. This is the transparent red that I talked about, and here is actually this is an emerald green. It's a nice little turquoise. What that did provide some little nice touches of color to the figure. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of that emerald green, and I'll just do a few spots of color like right here on that gemstone. Just gonna make the earrings be emerald also. This piece of cloth, just a touch of the green. Down here on the by the foot's gonna get a little bit, and finally here on this part of the costume, it's also gonna get some emerald green. Gonna hold this upside down. I can do a little bit here. And the reason I'm including this is just to kind of show, especially with flesh tones, it's important to show the environment around those colors. I'm gonna lighten that a little bit. That was just some of the maiden flesh. Just a few little spots of interest here and there. Not too much. You don't want to go to the point where you're distracting away from your flesh tones. Go a little step further. So again, all of a sudden, by having this, the flesh tone there, the highlights, well, they're not so bright. It sets that flesh tone back. It makes it darker. I don't really want to turn this into a gemstone painting exercise either, so I'm just gonna sort of leave some of this stuff alone. And just kind of call it a day and get into some of that transparent red. And that's going to be for some of our fingers. So what that's going to do is, as I mix it up with some of my other existing colors, a little too orangey before your fingers, they have those capillaries, and what I want to do is on some of the fingers here, make sure it's light enough. Hopefully you can see this. Just working my way down towards the tips, not so much on the knuckles, but just down towards tips of the fingers. Pads of the feet here. You can see what I've got. So that, by putting in the transparent red, it kind of changed the color a little bit. It's a little more intense, a little more pink. I need a little bit of that on undersides of the fingers here, on the thumb. Same thing on this hand. Just trying to get some of the tips of the fingers. So try it again. Got a little even more of the maiden flesh. Some on the toes here. And even up on the face. Gonna do a little bit, tiny touch on the nose. Just a little bit on the ear. Bring that out. I'm gonna put a few lighter highlights on the chest here. Not too much, just maybe a little bit there. One spot there. And another spot here. Possibly on the cheekbones here. I'm going to spin this around. So just try to bring out that cheekbone a little bit more. Now obviously if you're doing this for a painting competition or trying to win an award, well, you may spend hours and hours more on this, refining things, adding more stuff, tattoos, whatever you think you need to add to the figure. This was just supposed to be an exercise, and how would you approach this flesh tone? And hopefully some of these color methods, this guide here, will prove helpful. Be a little less confusing maybe on how to approach this, that it's not just brown, but there's lots of things that you can add in. Well, like can we just put this transparent red in just to get this effect on the pad of the foot? How we used some of the emerald green to make the flesh not quite as noticeable, because that was starting to get pretty noticeable until we had this bright green next to it. Same thing with some of the when you've got the lights of the costuming here. Let's put a few more of those in. So by the time you start to put some of these in, you start to set that darker flesh tone back a little bit. Let's put a few over here too. So again, you're pulling these bracelets out, setting the flesh tone back, pushing that towards the background. So I'll work my way around here, just thinking, okay, do I want this elbow to get a little more light? What if I was to take some of the emerald, mix that? I'm going to take a little bit of the sepia here, and these could be a few little highlights on the hair. Not many, just a little bit in some places here. We want this to be a little more towards the sepia tone. Gonna catch some of the ends of the hair. So it's up to you just how far that you want to take all this. You know, you could add even more lights to the hair. You could add some more bright highlights maybe on the bracelets and the bikinis and all that. Sometimes, like here, again, we have a limited amount of time. I'm going to pick out a few more highlights around the hair. Fingers, I think, needed a little there. Need a little something more there. And maybe you'll see, well, that's a little too light. Maybe I need to go the other way. And you can also you can go back into your brown liner, you can go back into some glazes and take things down. But I think we can call that complete for now.
Dark at the best. Well, here is the place where you can join the